Well, today we're diving deep into a really fascinating ancient text that tries to do just that. It offers a pretty unique way of looking at how we perceive the world, and maybe even what's underneath it all.
We're digging into the Sankhya Sutras, aren't we? Specifically verse 2.
That's the one, an ancient Indian text, possibly incredibly old, like
Yeah.
tens of thousands of years old, based on some dating
Which
methods.
is mind-blowing in itself. And it tackles this huge question: how do we actually understand the bedrock of reality, what the text calls the substratum?
Right. So our mission today, if you will, is to unpack what's in this single verse. It's pretty dense. We'll look at why our normal ways of, detecting things and understanding them might actually be, well, flawed.
Inherently limited, yeah.
And then explore the alternative it suggests, which is all about discerning the basic building blocks of the substratum.
It's kind of about getting a handle on how we even acquire knowledge in the first place, at a really fundamental level.
Okay, so first up, the limitations. The text uses this term, Grishtavadanusravik.
Right, Drishtavanatravik. It basically refers to our standard traditional ways of detecting things. Through senses, through instruments, the usual channels.
The everyday ways we gather info.
Exactly. And then it immediately says these methods are, well, uses another phrase, Sahivashudik Shayati Shayukta.
Okay, what does that boil down to?
It translates roughly to certainly distorted, attenuated, poor resolution. So the message is pretty clear.
Ouch. So no matter how hard we try or how fancy our tools are.
There are built-in problems. Distortion, like the signal gets warped, attenuation, it gets weaker, and poor resolution, we just can't see the fine details.
It's like trying to see stars in a city, maybe. Or hearing a whisper across a noisy room.
Good analogies.
Yeah.
Or even, a photocopy of a photocopy. The information degrades.
Makes sense.
And importantly, the text points out these defects aren't just in our receiving equipment, like our eyes or ears or machines.
Where else?
They could be right at the source of whatever we're observing. Or they could creep in during the transmission, the journey of the information.
Or it could be us, the observers.
Precisely. Our own biases, our own limitations, they can distort what we perceive too. It's a really holistic view of potential error.
Okay, so if our usual methods are, let's say, inherently shaky, what's the alternative?
Yeah.
The sutra must offer something else.
It does. It introduces Tadvaparitha Shreyan, which means something like, hence, an alternative is appropriate or superior.
A better way.
A better way, yes. And this better way comes from Vyaktha Vidinanath.
Another complex term. Break that down for us.
It essentially means understanding reality by discriminating the substratum into its core aspects.
Discriminating, not just observing.
Right. Actively differentiating. It breaks it down into the manifest, the unmanifest, the self-potential, and the kinetic or dynamic potential.
Okay, hang on. Manifest and unmanifest. That sounds like things we can see versus things we can't. Potential versus actual.
Sort of, yeah. Unmanifest is the potential, the static, the hidden background. Manifest is what becomes detectable, dynamic, what shows up on our radar.
And self-potential. Is that like the underlying energy?
You could think of it like that. The inherent capacity within the substratum. And then kinetic or dynamic potential is the active force, the movement, the energy in action.
So instead of just looking at the surface, this method asks us to analyze the underlying components, like understanding an engine by knowing the pistons, the fuel, the spark.
That's a good way to put it. It's about grasping the fundamental ingredients and their states. It gives you a deeper framework than just what I see.
That feels like where those aha moments might come from, right? Seeing the deeper structure.
Exactly. It suggests a more profound way to categorize and hopefully understand reality.
And the text connects these logically. It mentions some other terms. Ikantha, Aithiyantha.
Yes, it links ikantha and athiyantha to the manifest and unmanifest states, and then atho and apavath to the kinetic and potential states within that dynamic aspect.
We don't have the exact definitions here, but it sounds like there's a clear system.
There's definitely a structure. It implies a coherent logic connecting these concepts. It even refers back to Sutra 1.
Ah, yes, you mentioned that. Establishing coherent interactions.
Right. It says Sutra 1 laid the groundwork for these balanced, contained interactions within the substratum, though it apparently admits that First Sutra is tough to grasp initially.
Fills the intrigues.
Doesn't it? And then it drops this really interesting hint, linking vector forces from polarization to something called guna logic.
Vector forces, guna logic. That sounds almost mathematical or physical.
It does hint at something more than just abstract philosophy.
Yeah.
While we don't have guna logic fully explained in this snippet, The mention of vectors and polarization suggests an underlying, perhaps axiomatic structure.
Like fundamental forces or qualities interacting, almost like physics principles.
Potentially, yeah. It points towards a system with internal consistency, maybe even predictive power, if you understand the rules. It suggests understanding the substratum isn't just passive, it involves grasping these operational principles.
Okay, so we have the flawed standard methods
Mhm.
and this alternative based on discrimination. How does the actual act of detection fit in? How do we sense the manifest?
This is where it gets really crucial. The text states detection hinges on emanation.
Emanation. Like something has to be given off.
Exactly. Something can exist, but if it doesn't emanate something light, sound, a field, whatever, in a way we can register, it remains undetected by us.
Wow. So there could be stuff out there, whole layers of reality, just not sending out signals we can pick up.
That's the implication. It opens up the possibility of vast realms beyond our direct perception.
Mind-bending. Okay, so if something is detected, it's because it emanated. What else?
The detected information, the signal, it has to be in a state of relative movement. That's the kinetic potential part.
It has to be dynamic,
Yeah.
changing.
Yes. Information that's completely static or perfectly potential remains undetected. Detection requires a dynamic element, a difference, a movement relative to a background.
That makes intuitive sense. Our senses are geared towards change, aren't they? Movement, contrast.
Precisely. And this naturally leads to the role of time.
Ah, okay. How does time figure into this?
The text suggests our very ability to detect anything at this fundamental level depends on discerning a time interval, a duration,
So we need to perceive something lasting for a certain amount of time.
or, more fundamentally, perceive a difference in time. It talks about synchronization. If movements or oscillations become perfectly synchronized.
Meaning they happen at the exact same rhythm.
Yes. So synchronized that the time difference between them becomes too small for us to detect. Then the phenomenon appears static, inert, undetectable as movement.
Like a spinning top going so fast it looks still.
Kind of like that, but perhaps even more fundamental. This undetectable interval, the time difference that's too small to perceive, is presented as the primary or first differential, like the basic unit of time perception.
So below a certain threshold of time difference, things just blur into oneness for us.
That's the idea. And the logical consequence is that detection requires a relative difference. You need at least 2 units, as the text puts it, to perceive something.
2 units, meaning a comparison, a difference.
Yes, this is where it connects to the Advaita and Dvaita concept. Manifestation, when detected, is always dualistic, Dvaita or pluralistic. You need a contrast, a this versus a that, a figure against a ground.
So the very act of seeing something separate means there's duality involved.
In the perception, yes. And the flip side is Advaita non-duality. The text concisely puts it, not 2 Advaita therefore means 1. The absence of that detectable difference signifies the underlying undifferentiated unity.
Fascinating. Okay, and how does actual change arise from this? How do we see something become manifest?
Through time delay. It uses this ratio analogy, which is quite clever.
Good ratios.
Yeah. 1/1 represents the undetectable synchronized state. Perfect balance, numerator and denominator the same.
Okay.
Then 1/2 represents the first detectable change. It signifies an increase of 1 time unit relative to that synchronized background.
Ah, so the ratio changes, the fraction appears. That difference, that 1/2, is the detectable change against the 1/1 background.
Precisely. That 1 isn't just a number. It's that smallest relational set, perfectly synced. The fraction signifies a loss of synchronization, a difference emerging, which is what we perceive as a manifest phenomenon,
Yeah.
like the ripple on the still pond.
That makes a lot of sense. It's the break in symmetry, the loss of sync that catches our attention.
Exactly. So to tie together, if something is perfectly synchronized with a fundamental substratum, it remains unmanifest, undetectable. The potential is there, but static relative to us.
But if it's out of sync?
If the time difference or displacement is large enough, if it has kinetic force, dynamic potential, then we can detect it.
So the phenomena we usually notice, the stuff of the world, are essentially the non-synchronized bits, the parts that are out of step with the fundamental rhythm.
That's what a non-discriminating observer, as a text might put it, typically perceives, yes. The things that stand out because they differ.
Which leads to a pretty amazing idea, doesn't it, about the observer?
It really does. The text suggests that to detect the subtlest phenomena, the things closest to that fundamental synchronization,
We need to.
we, the observers, need to achieve a synchronized or coherent state ourselves. at least within our own minds, our cerebral system.
Get ourselves in tune with the substratum.
Yeah.
Minimize our own internal static.
That's the principle, to reduce our own noise to perceive the universe's faintest signals.
That's profound. But what if some things are just fundamentally undetectable, no matter how synchronized we become? Can we still know about them?
And that's where the text really champions abstract thinking. It stresses the crucial role of theorization and rigorous logic.
So when direct perception fails,
Our ability to build coherent theories, to reason logically, becomes essential to complete our understanding of nature. It validates the power of the intellect, of mathematics, of axiomatic reasoning.
it's not just about seeing, it's about thinking correctly, too. Okay, and did it say how we might achieve this beneficial synchronized mental state?
Give some pointers. Being stress-free, not initiating mental or physical activity constantly, passively accepting thoughts without getting caught up, relaxed ease, contentment.
Sounds like mindfulness or meditation.
Very much so. It mentions a no-want state, renouncing the constant urge to do something. This state is linked back to those terms like kanta, athiantha, atha, abufath.
And described how.
As a self-similar, frictionless, unhindered, it uses the word kaivalya, relatively static state of resonance.
Wow, frictionless resonance. Quieting the mind allows it to resonate more clearly with, well, with reality itself.
That's the implication. And initiating deep thought, complex inquiry from that state gives the best chance of finding a correct solution, of achieving true understanding.
And it mentioned other sutras, 4, 5, 6, and a siddhi meditative process.
Yes, hinting at further details on how to mentally grasp phenomena, perhaps through specific meditative techniques. Definitely sounds like material for another deep dive sometime.
For sure. Okay, so just to wrap our heads around the key takeaways from verse 2.
Well, first, our standard ways of knowing are inherently limited. Distortion, attenuation, poor resolution are always possibilities.
Right. And the alternative is to discriminate the underlying reality, the substratum, into its components.
Yeah.
Manifest, unmanifest, potential, kinetic.
And detection itself relies on emanation, and crucially requires a difference, a relative movement, a break from perfect synchronization.
Which introduces time intervals and the idea that detected reality is inherently dualistic, contrasting with an underlying non-dual unity.
And finally, achieving a more synchronized, coherent mental state might allow us to perceive subtler realities. And where perception fails, rigorous logic and theory are key.
When you think about the relevance today, it really makes you question the information you receive, doesn't it? How much distortion might be there.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder about cultivating that inner stillness, that synchronized state. Could it genuinely lead to clearer thinking, deeper insights in our own lives?
It's a powerful thought, and it leaves us with a big question, really. Thinking about detection needing difference. What might be out there, totally undetectable to us right now, yet still profoundly influencing everything.
And maybe, just maybe, could tuning our own minds, seeking that frictionless resonance, actually change our ability to sense those subtle truths.
Definitely gives you something profound to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.